The bullies harassed a woman at a gas station. Then 100 bikers showed up and surrounded them. It was a warm evening at a quiet gas station on the outskirts of town, where the sound of insects blended with the hum of passing cars. A woman pulled up beside one of the pumps, exhausted from a long drive, her mind set only on refueling and getting home safely. But as she stepped out, the stillness of the night was broken by laughter. A group of young men hanging by the store entrance had turned their attention toward her. Their voices were sharp, teasing, and filled with arrogance. At first, she brushed it off, pretending not to hear. She kept her eyes low, her hands steady as she began filling her tank, hoping they'd lose interest. But they didn't. Instead, their taunts grew louder, more personal, more cruel. One of them called out a comment that made her freeze. Her heart thudded in her chest and she glanced around, searching for someone to help, but no one moved. The clerk behind the glass just stared, too afraid to interfere. When she walked toward the counter to pay, they followed, forming a loose circle around her. Their shadows loomed in the dim light of the station, and she could smell the alcohol on their breath. One of them kicked a small stone, letting it bounce off her tire. Another mocked the fear in her eyes, enjoying the power it gave him. She tried to keep her voice calm as she said, "Please, just let me go." But they laughed, blocking her path back to her car. One of them suddenly snatched her keys from her hand and dangled them like a trophy. "What's the rush?" He sneered, waving them just out of reach. She tried to grab them back, but he pushed her shoulder roughly, making her stumble. In that terrifying moment, the woman felt completely alone. The air felt heavy, her throat tight, tears blurring her vision. She wished someone, anyone, would show up. And then, just as the bullies' laughter echoed through the night, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A low rumble rolled through the distance, deep and steady like thunder approaching. The men paused, confused, looking down the road. The rumble grew louder, closer, until the silence was shattered by the roar of engines. One by one, headlights appeared, cutting through the darkness. Then came another and another, until the entire road was lined with motorcycles. The bullies froze, their mocking grins fading into fear as nearly 100 bikers pulled into the station, engines growling in perfect rhythm. The woman turned toward the lights, her eyes wide, unsure what to think. But as the bikers formed a circle around her and shut off their engines, she realized she was no longer alone. The lead biker stepped off his motorcycle, walked up quietly, and held out her keys. She took them with shaking hands, whispering a thank you she could barely speak. The bikers said nothing. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to silence the bullies completely. The laughter was gone, replaced by the sound of engines cooling and a heavy, unmistakable message in the air. Respect and protection had arrived. The air grew tense as the woman's trembling voice tried to reason with the bullies, begging them to stop. They only laughed harder, circling her car like predators toying with their prey. One of them snatched her keys from her shaking hands and held them up mockingly, swinging them back and forth just out of reach. She pleaded for him to return them, her voice cracking under fear, but her desperation only made them crueler. Another man opened her car door, pretending to search through her belongings while the others jeered. Her heart raced, tears spilling down her cheeks as she tried to back away, but they surrounded her, their shadows growing longer under the harsh glow of the station lights. When one of them shoved her shoulder, she stumbled to the ground, the sound of their laughter echoing painfully in her ears. She glanced toward the cashier's window, hoping for help, but the attendant only stood frozen, too afraid to act. The woman's pulse hammered in her ears. She felt helpless, trapped, and utterly alone in that dimly lit station. Then, suddenly, something shifted in the air. A low, deep rumble crept from the distance. Faint at first, almost like thunder rolling across the sky. The bullies paused, exchanging uncertain glances. The woman turned her head toward the road, her breath catching as the rumble grew louder, heavier, until it began to shake the ground beneath them. One of the men muttered something under his breath, his smirk faltering. Then came the first set of headlights, bright white beams cutting through the night, and then another, and another. Within moments, the entire stretch of highway was filled with the blinding lights of motorcycles. Their engines roared in perfect rhythm, the sound building into an overwhelming chorus that silenced every cruel laugh in the station. The bullies stepped back instinctively, the color draining from their faces as they realized what was happening. The motorcycles pulled into the station one by one, sleek chrome and black leather gleaming under the lights. The woman's tears froze midstream as she watched in awe, unable to believe what she was seeing. Dozens, no, nearly 100, bikers had arrived, their engines growling like thunder, their presence commanding absolute authority. They fanned out in a slow, deliberate motion, forming a solid ring around the woman and her car. The bullies, who only moments ago had been so bold, now stood completely still, eyes darting in panic. The bikers didn't shout, didn't threaten. Their silence was more powerful than any words. The woman clutched her chest, overwhelmed by relief, as the nearest biker dismounted, stepped forward, and handed her the keys that had been stolen from her. She looked up at him, her lips trembling with gratitude, but he only nodded once before turning his gaze toward the bullies. The engines revved together, echoing like the heartbeat of justice. In that moment, the balance of fear shifted completely. The predators had become the prey. The gas station lights flickered against the chrome of countless motorcycles as the roar of engines filled the air, shaking the ground like a storm. The woman stood frozen beside her car, her hands trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. All around her, the bikers formed a tight circle, their machines positioned like a steel fortress of protection. Their presence was silent but powerful, each rider watching the bullies with a calm, intimidating stare that needed no words. The bullies, who only moments ago had been loud and confident, now stood pale and motionless, unsure of what to do. The woman's breath came in shallow waves as one of the bikers, a tall figure with steady eyes, stepped off his motorcycle and walked toward her. The sound of his boots echoed in the stillness. Without saying a single word, he extended his hand and offered her the keys that had been taken from her. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. Her voice broke as she whispered a thank you, her fear slowly giving way to relief. The biker gave her a small nod, then turned his gaze toward the men who had tormented her. His expression never changed, but the tension in the air grew heavier. The bullies shuffled backward, realizing they were outnumbered, outmatched, and completely exposed. The silence between the engines was unbearable, stretching out like a warning. Then the leader of the bikers raised his hand slightly, and all around him, the riders twisted their throttles in perfect sync. The roar that followed was deafening, an ocean of sound that shook the bullies to their core. It wasn't a call to fight. It was a declaration of dominance, of unity, of justice. The message was clear. This woman was under their protection now, and anyone who dared to harm her would face them all. The woman wiped the tears from her cheeks, her eyes wide with awe as she looked around at the hundreds of riders who had shown up for her. These weren't ordinary people. They were strangers bound by a code of loyalty and courage. They hadn't come for violence or attention. They had come because someone was in trouble, and that was enough for them. The bullies glanced at each other, trying to find the courage to speak, but none of them could. Every biker's gaze was like a mirror reflecting their shame. Slowly, they began to step back, retreating toward their car without a word. The bikers didn't chase or threaten. They just watched, their silence saying everything. When the woman finally climbed back into her car, she felt a calm strength she hadn't known before. The leader gave one final nod, signaling the others, and one by one the bikers started their engines again. The sound rolled through the night like thunder, echoing long after they disappeared down the road. The bullies were gone, but the message remained. Courage is louder than cruelty, and sometimes heroes arrive on two wheels. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the dark road as police cars pulled into the gas station, sirens fading into the distance. The chaos that had filled the air only minutes before had vanished, replaced by an eerie calm. The bullies stood frozen, their bravado completely gone, their faces pale as the officers approached. They tried to explain themselves, stammering excuses, but their trembling hands and guilty eyes said it all. The officers quickly took control of the situation, separating them and questioning witnesses. The woman, still shaken but safe, stood beside her car surrounded by the bikers who had refused to leave her side. The leader of the group gave her a reassuring nod, his calm strength steadying her trembling heart. When one of the officers asked if she was all right, she managed to whisper that she was, her voice cracking from the mix of fear and relief. As the police handcuffed the bullies and led them toward the patrol car, the crowd that had gathered began to murmur. A few people recorded the scene, capturing the moment justice was served. The woman turned toward the bikers, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't know any of them, yet they had risked their time and safety to protect her without hesitation. One of the bikers stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. His voice was deep but kind as he said, "No one stands alone." That simple sentence broke the last of her composure, and she began to cry. This time not out of fear, but from gratitude. The biker gave her a small smile and stepped back as the engines around them began to roar softly, signaling it was time for them to leave. The woman watched as one by one, the motorcycles came to life, their headlights glowing like stars cutting through the night. The sound of 100 engines filled the air, not as noise, but as a heartbeat, a rhythm of unity and protection. As they rolled out of the gas station in a perfect formation, the wind from their departure brushed against her face, and she felt it carry away every trace of fear that had clung to her. When the last taillight disappeared into the darkness, the gas station felt empty again. But it wasn't the same. It had become a symbol of courage, of strangers standing up against cruelty. By the next morning, videos of the incident spread across social media, capturing hearts around the world. People praised the bikers' bravery, calling them heroes on two wheels. News outlets picked up the story, sharing headlines about the woman who was harassed and the 100 riders who came to her rescue. The woman's life changed forever that night. Every time she heard the distant rumble of a motorcycle afterward, her heart would skip, not from fear, but from comfort. She knew that somewhere out there good people still existed, people who didn't need capes or badges to do what was right, only courage, loyalty, and the roar of an engine to make the world a little safer.